Good morning. I'm Reverend Meredith Barber, and I'm the minister here at Horizon Unitarian Universalist Church. We're so glad that you are with us today, whether you're joining us in person or virtually, whether you're here for the first time, or whether you've been here for longer than you can remember. Here at Horizon, we welcome people of all faiths and of no faith in particular. Whoever you are, wherever you are on your journey, you are welcome here among us. So at this time, I invite Laura Wooten to come forward and say a few words.
Happy Halloween! How many of you think you're open-minded? All right, let's find out. So next Sunday after service, we are having a Beyond Categorical Thinking workshop, which is to help us recognize and see our own biases. And it's a really important part of our process to get ready to invite a new minister into Horizon. Not that we don't want to keep Meredith, but she's interim and she's sticking around for a little while longer, but we're going to have a called minister coming in the summer, 2023. But we need your help in getting ready for this and getting your mindset and making sure that we're all open-minded about this new person that we're going to bring into the pulpit. So please join us next Sunday after church. There's a little thing in your order of worship to register. We'd like to get a head count because we're going to try to feed you a light lunch, and we will have childcare available. So please join us after church from 12 to 3 next Sunday. Thank you.
We gather this morning to perform old rituals, maybe in new ways, to usher in what is known as the dark half of the year, to give death and grief and loss of all kinds a seat at the table. We gather this morning to remember those we have loved in complicated ways, to mourn those whose absence we feel deeply, to wonder about what might come next. We might gather in reluctance. We may feel ourselves hesitant to open up, to feel pain, to acknowledge loss, to acknowledge that we have changed over the past 2 years. But we gather anyway, because we need a space to be and to love and to feel, to force ourselves to sit still, to let our minds go where they need to let the words wash over us, picking up the ones we need. So come, gather in, and let us worship together.
We light our chalice this morning with words from the Reverend Florence Caplow. As we kindle this flame, we honor and remember those who have passed into the mystery. Their brightness lives on in our vision. Their courage lives on in our commitments. And their love continues to bless the world through us. I invite you to join me now in saying together the words of our affirmation. Love is the doctrine of our church. The quest for truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve humanity in harmony with the earth. Thus do we covenant together. I invite you to rise, either in body or in spirit, and join in singing our opening hymn, Though I May Speak with Bravest Fire.
Thank you.
So at this time, I'd like to invite us, if anybody brought donations for MetroCrest, if you want to pass it to the end of your aisle, maybe give it to a young person. And I'd like to have our young folks come forward. Wow, okay, all right. So we have a lot of friends up here today. I see some folks maybe dressed up in costumes, yes. Okay. So we have something really exciting coming up tomorrow. Can anybody tell me what that is? Yep. Halloween, yes. Who's excited? Is everybody excited? Yeah, tomorrow. Tomorrow's Halloween. Yes, everybody's excited. What are you guys being? A butterfly? What are you being? Elf? Okay, yep. Glenda. Mm-hmm. Okay, inflatable alien abduction. Wow. Yeah, mm-hmm. Okay, yeah. Harry Potter. Oh my gosh. Mm-hmm. A shadow? Oh my gosh, that's so creative. Mm-hmm. Baby Yoda. Oh my gosh. Okay, wow. All right, so it seems like people are really excited. Uh-huh. Okay. Okay. So I know we're really excited about Halloween, but I also wanted to tell you a little bit about something else that's also happening tomorrow, which you may or may not be familiar with. It's something called Samhain. Has anybody heard of this before? Samhain. So Samhain is a pagan festival. And I want to tell you just a little tiny bit about kind of its origins, and maybe you guys want to talk to your grown-ups a little bit more about it. So Samhain started out in the part of the world where the Celts lived. So we're talking about like Scotland, Ireland, like a place where it's really rainy and cold and dark, but it's also very beautiful. And it started out as what we would call a fire festival. So in the time that it began, people were growing all of their food. So they would have to harvest all their crops. I know that might not be something we can kind of imagine today, but imagine you're like working in the fields, you want to bring in the harvest, this is all your food for the winter. And so that's a really exciting time, but it's also a time when everybody kind of has to work together to get something done. So people would heat their homes with fires, and what they would do is after they completed the harvest, so everybody's harvesting their crops together, they would light this really big fire, and everybody would kind of take a piece of their fire back to their own hearth, so back to their own fireplace, so everyone's kind of a part of it. And some people think that this is where jack-o'-lanterns come from. So they would take pieces of the fire and light like turnips. So they might put a candle in a turnip and bring it back to their house. So people think that maybe that eventually turned into pumpkins. So over some time, we also know that different religious traditions kind of came to this part of the world, right? So before, where people might have celebrated kind of the natural world, harvesting, fire, now there's also like going to church, which is a new thing. And so they're trying to make that whole fire festival a part of church. So that's where we get kind of All Souls, All Saints, where we get this idea that we're going to celebrate folks that have passed on from this life, the idea that we're kind of communing with spirits. So I just wanted to share all of that with you because we're going to talk to the grown-ups about that today. And maybe that's something that you guys want to go home and talk to your grown-ups about too as we get ready for Halloween tomorrow. Maybe this idea of kind of celebrating the dead, loss, and also kind of this dark part of the year. That's something to kind of think about. So thank you all so much for listening. And now it's time to sing you to your classes, okay? So we can talk after the service. Our first reading is entitled For Grief by John O'Donohue. He writes, "When you lose someone you love, your life becomes strange. The ground beneath you gets fragile. Your thoughts make your eyes unsure, and some dead echo drags your voice down where words have no confidence. Your heart has grown heavy with loss, and though this loss has wounded others too, no one knows what has been taken from you when the silence of absence deepens. Flickers of guilt kindle regret for all that was left unsaid or undone. And there are days when you wake up happy, again inside the fullness of life, until the moment breaks and you are thrown back onto the black tide of loss. Days when you have your heart back, you are able to function well, until in the middle of work or encounter, suddenly with no warning, you are ambushed by grief. It becomes hard to trust yourself. All you can depend on now is that sorrow will remain faithful to itself. More than you, it knows its way, and will find the right time to pull and pull the rope of grief until that coiled hill of tears has reduced to its last drop. Gradually, you will learn acquaintance with the invisible form of your departed. And when the work of grief is done, the wound of loss will heal, and you will have learned to wean your eyes from that gap in the air and be able to enter the hearth in your soul where your loved one has awaited your return all the time." We come now to the time in our worship service that we set aside for meditation and prayer. We'll have a time of shared silence, hear the joys and sorrows of our community. We'll have a spoken prayer, and then we'll join in singing our responsive hymn, Spirit of Life. I invite you to join me now in a moment of silence. We share in sorrow this morning for the Halloween tragedy that occurred in Seoul this weekend. We also share in sorrow with Liz Bibot upon the passing of her father, George Anthony, on October 22nd. Liz shares that she is well and at peace. And we also share in joy with Kim and Viplav Sinho at the arrival of their baby, Lukash. Our words of prayer this morning come from the writings of the Reverend Kristen Schmidt. In a world of winners and losers, successes and failures, right and wrong, it's easier to celebrate the saints, religion's moral medalists and heroes. It's easier to celebrate the saints, those of haloed heads and storied myths, those whose true selves few, if any, can recall. their humanity obscured by carefully crafted image, documented miracles shining down from pedestals built far too high. It's easier to celebrate the saints, and plenty of saints are worth celebrating. Truly, exemplars extraordinaire. But today we celebrate all souls. All souls. All of the souls. Every single one. The sweet and the grating. The loved and the hated. The cherished and the neglected. The valued and the exploited. The exalted and the lowly. All souls, whether they were saints or not. All souls, because all life is one. Spirit of life and death and change and transformation, spirit that is always becoming, mystery beyond all naming, yet who is closer than hands and feet, and who calls us each beloved, we give thanks that today is set aside for us to remember not only our ancestors, not only our saints, not only our family, not only our friends and acquaintances and neighbors. We give thanks for this one day a year that bids us remember the entirety of humanity, the whole history of conscious life that lived and died and brought us to this era, this moment, this breath. We give thanks for a day to be honest, to be real about the complex feelings that can bubble up when people die. A day to remember that we are bound to all of humanity, all of the souls, not by blood or rank or status, not by political party or religion or place of birth, but by our common humanity. All of the souls, all sacred, all holy, all one. In the name of all that we find holy. Amen. I invite us now to remain seated and join in singing our responsive hymn, Spirit of Life.
Our second reading this morning is entitled Immortality by the Reverend Leslie Takahashi. In the daily weave of our lives, those who have died are still strong, guiding threads. Theirs is the golden glimmer, or perhaps the brilliant red, or the melancholy blue. Still, they are part of the whole cloth of our lives. They are the ancestors, the goers before. Through this, we know immortality. In the hour-to-hour rush of our daily tasks, they travel with us through something they taught us, which is now ours to do, through something they loved, which is now ours to carry out, through something we shared, which is now ours alone, and yet not. Through this, we know immortality. In the minute-to-minute grasp of where we are, we remember the joys our departed gave us, which opened us up to hope. The sorrows we knew together, which taught us strength. The life shared, which is now ours to steward. Through this, we know immortality. In the second-to-second pulse of life, we sense the spirit of those we have loved and lost. This presence is too shy for naming, too amorphous for full knowing, and yet as real as the days we've shared. Through this, we know immortality. They are more than remembered. They are memory itself. For what we love lives on in the way our beloved dead accompany us through life, our life. Their words and wisdom our guide, their humor our relief, their restless concern for the world our change. Through this, we know immortality.
So it is the end of October now, and we are ushering in the darkness, especially as the light part of our days gets shorter. Tomorrow, many of us will celebrate Halloween by taking kids trick-or-treating or giving out candy. And some among us will know well what I shared with the kids earlier, that Samhain is also tomorrow, which is the Celtic pagan holiday which celebrated the bringing in of the harvest and ushering in the dark half of the year. And it's also said to be the time where the veil between the living world and the spirit world is at its thinnest. We have these concepts in many traditions, signaling that we are moving into a new time in the natural world, moving into a time where we embrace darkness. And we're also seeing this desire to have a specific time on the calendar when we have a chance to commune with our loved ones who have gone from this life. And this concept of thin time, of a way to connect with those we love who have passed, extends across many cultures and traditions, because of course we need some sort of ritualized way of remembering, acknowledging that they are with us still. The losses start to feel more real as we enter this season of rituals and memories. And one way that this has been addressed in UU history that I didn't know much about until recent years is the spiritualist movement. So spiritualism first appeared in the 1840s in this part of Western New York, an area that seems to have been really fertile ground for a lot of kinds of religious revivals during the Second Great Awakening. And this is a time in history when people are really wondering, asking deep questions about how we're going to live in this world together and about what life should be like. So spiritualism is the belief that there is an actual spirit world where those who have passed on from this life continue to evolve and live. And if you've ever seen like Long Island Medium or those type of shows, spiritualism was characterized by the belief that some people could actually talk to spirits. So a lot of prominent spiritualists were women and were involved in social justice causes of the day like the abolition movement and the suffrage movement. And both Unitarians and Universalists alike, some endorse the spiritualist movement. And I bring this up because, one, I think it's interesting, and two, because I think we can all identify with this desire to connect to something bigger than ourselves, to another world maybe, to people we love that we can no longer talk to or be with. There's that desire to keep the connection going. In the words of the poet May Sarton, absence becomes the greatest presence. And because of that, whether the mediums were having real experiences or not, the emotional needs were real. Halloween in popular culture also gives us a chance to deal with death directly, to give death a seat at the table, something I don't think we're really very good at. In previous times throughout history, it's worth noting that people had a much closer and more personal relationship with death. Our refusal to deal with and acknowledge it is almost the idea that we should somehow be able to shield ourselves from anything we aren't ready to deal with, anything unpleasant, until our time comes. We try not to talk about it. Folks who are dealing with serious illness are constantly encouraged to be fighters and warriors. But what happens when that doesn't work? Or when our bodies get tired? It didn't used to be this way either, this distancing from death. The Victorian era was known for its acknowledgement of death as a reality of life, maybe somewhat bordering on fascination. It was common in those days for people to die of things we wouldn't now, thanks to modern medicine, and they made memento moris, often rings or lockets with the hair of the deceased inside. Reminders both of the person and also that one day each of us will die. In Christian traditions, Ash Wednesday is a reminder of this. As you receive ashes on your forehead, you are told, "Remember you are dust, and to dust you shall return." And it's harsh in one way, comforting in another. On one hand, it can cause us to feel insignificant, but on the other hand, that's the whole point. The idea that we are all returning to a part of the same whole. I myself, though I would not call myself a Christian, have received ashes before, because I found the reminder that I am part of a whole, that I will one day return to the other, that our time is short, that we are all human. I found all of that necessary to remember. So whether it be marked by ashes on the forehead, dirt under the fingernails, the wind on our faces, or in some other way, we are called to remember this and to remember it well. Frederick Buechner writes, "When you remember me, it means that you have carried something of who I am with you, that I have left some mark of who I am on who you are. It means that you can summon me back to your mind, even though countless years and miles may stand between us. It means that if we meet again, you will know me. It means that even after I die, you can still see my face and hear my voice and speak to me in your heart. For as long as you remember me, I am never entirely lost. When I'm feeling most ghost-like, it's your remembering me that helps remind me that I actually exist. When I'm feeling sad, it's my consolation. When I'm feeling happy, it's part of why I feel that way. If you forget me, one of the ways I remember who I am will be gone. If you forget me, part of who I am will be gone." This is the fear, I think, that if people stop remembering us, or if we stop remembering those we love, that they will cease to exist all over again in our minds. Writer Nora McInerney, in her new book, shares this story. Our neighbor, a sensitive little girl with streams of glossy dark hair and eyes that look like they came from another dimension, was brought to hysterics by a class field trip to a historical village, the kind where groups of grade schoolers tour ancient cabins to see how settlers lived without Wi-Fi or running water. "They're all dead," she wept to her mother at bedtime. "They're all dead, and nobody remembers them." At 9, she had realized that our memories are the only things keeping us here, a weak Velcro preventing us from being ripped from the history of time. We want to remember because we too fear existential obliteration, shudder at the thought of being lost to an endless sea of unforgettable moments long forgotten. Maybe unsurprisingly to some, I was the kind of kid who wondered about how we remember and what happens after we die, and can people still love us from another place? But we do remember, of course. Our work is to remember those that made us and formed us and loved us into the people we are today. We know that we are connected by a sacred thread that goes back further than we can imagine, that calls us to remember those who made us who we are today. And we don't remember them as perfect, but we try to acknowledge them as they were. Part of the task of memory and remembering is to acknowledge what Leslie Takahashi writes about, that because of the experience of having loved and lost, we are fundamentally changed, and we become the vessels through which memory is carried. From the reading we heard earlier, in the minute-to-minute grasp of where we are, we remember the joys our departed gave us, which opened us up to hope, the sorrows we knew together which taught us strength, the life shared which is now ours to steward. Through this we know immortality. She continues, they are more than remembered, they are memory itself. For what we love lives on in the way our beloved dead accompany us through our life. Their words and wisdom, our guide, their humor, our relief, their restless concern for the world, our charge. Remembering well is about knowing all of this, and also remembering our place in the interconnected web, remembering that one day we too will join the ancestors. We will join those who have gone before. The Unitarian Universalist perspective on death and memorializing our loved ones is one of gratitude. I most often get asked for memorial services that are celebrations of life, that are personal, that include details about who that person really was. Authenticity and truth-telling are at the center, and I've noticed that we care less about what might come afterwards. We are content to let the mystery be. But though our heads may intellectually want to move quickly to celebrating that person and the gift of their life, our hearts tell the truth, and they are hurting. When people leave our lives, they leave a big space behind where loneliness and sadness live. I've heard it said that grief can be like a spiral. You move outward from the actual loss, things move in up and downs. And as time passes, things get a little easier for a while. You think you're on an upswing, doing okay, living your life, getting through the day, and something hits you. A song, a memory, a smell, the way the sunlight glints off the trees, and suddenly you're back to the bottom of the spiral, back to the very beginning, and the loss feels fresh and new again. Our grief is not linear, but comes in waves, in the arc of a spiral. And though it doesn't always feel good to hurt like this, it is a sign that we have not numbed out or let the stress of everyday life take over. We are still human beings, very much in tune with the joys and sorrows of life. To grieve is a sign that we have loved deeply, and that itself is a gift. We heard this tide pull of loss in the reading earlier from John O'Donohue. There are days when you wake up happy, again inside the fullness of life until the moment breaks, and you are thrown back onto the black tide of loss. Days when you have your heart back, you are able to function well until in the middle of work or encounter, suddenly with no warning, you are ambushed by grief. We all, each one of us, know more about grief now than we may have in the years before. And we know that there are different kinds of loss. We have been through an unimaginable collective trauma as a result of the pandemic and all that has come after. Many of us lost people and could not be there, could not grieve the way we wanted to. And even for those who didn't, other things were lost too. The way of life we knew was gone. We lost the people we were before. We have fundamentally changed, even if we cannot see or recognize it within ourselves. Our hearts have changed, our souls have changed, and we cannot go back to those former versions of ourselves do not exist any longer. And maybe that's a gift too. This desire to go back to the way things were is a classic response to trauma of any kind. We want the safety of what we know, rather than the fear and uncertainty of what we don't. But the before is no longer, and so we must ask why. Why do we need to go back? What is it really that we miss? Can we name it? Can we put it into words? This church community also said goodbye to Reverend Laura Brandis during the pandemic, and that loss was and still is felt deeply. When a minister leaves, even though that person is still very much alive, it can feel kind of like a death because of the boundaries we work so hard to uphold. Communication ceases. That person stays away from the community for a significant amount of time, or maybe forever. And where once there was a deep relationship of love and care, there is a hole, an absence, left for a new minister to enter and show love and care in their own way that will undoubtedly be different. It is really, really hard, and it is so worth it. To love others and to allow ourselves to be loved, this is at the heart of what I think life is about. And to love through grief, that is an experience of the holy. Megan Devine writes, "Grief no more needs a solution than love needs a solution. We cannot triumph over death or loss or grief. They are immovable elements of being alive. If we continue to look at them as though they are problems to be solved, we'll never get solace or comfort in our deepest pain." One of my professors in seminary, Dr. Kimberly Patton, would remind us again and again and again of this idea, this ancient belief that nothing is ever really gone. Rather, it is with us in a different way. This idea is one I have carried in my bones forever, really, since before I knew it was a thing that other people believe. It is one of my givens about the universe. And so there's something special about this time of year, this time when darkness comes earlier, when it gets cold outside, because there's a drawing in, a staying in where it's warm, a time of reflection upon the whirlwind surrounding us. And we need darkness for the stars to show up clearly. I'm reminded of the benediction words from my home congregation about a love that holds us across time and death and the space between the stars. Across all the layers and things unseen and unexplained, love remains. And as our time together draws to a close this morning, I'm thinking about all these little pieces of the same big picture. This desire to acknowledge death, to communicate with those gone from this life, to deal with absence felt when a loved one leaves us behind, to deal with the loneliness of grief. And I'm thinking about all the different kinds of grief we've talked about: pandemic grief, grief for the people we once were, for the life we once had, acknowledging the loss of a very important relationship. And all of these are a part of remembering those we have loved and lost, remembering our former selves, remembering that love does not ever die, even as our bodies fail, that we keep loving and our love keeps being felt. To know all of that is to remember well. May it be so. Amen. So at this time, I'm going to invite you into a ritual of remembrance and acknowledgement of grief. And what I'd like you to do as the music plays is to come forward. We'll come down these side aisles and we'll return to our seats through the center aisle. And I'd like you to tie a ribbon, as you see done here, onto these wreaths. We have lots of bright and beautiful colors. And as you're tying this ribbon, I invite you to think about someone you've lost, maybe a relationship you've lost, about some kind of loss that you're feeling inside you this morning. I invite us now, thinking of the loss we named with this ribbon, to listen to these words from the Reverend Heather Januels. This is called "The Sacred Thread." They once dwelled among us, the people of memory. They who knew us, they who taught us, they who heard us, they who loved us. They touch our lives time and again through their presence and their absence, through familiar scents and favorite songs, through old stories and renewed sorrow. As the earth turns and leaves fall, we reach back to renew the bonds between us. With hearts and hands open, we hold on to love ever stronger than death. We reach back in gratitude and understanding. Without our time together, the pain and the joy, we would never be who we are today. We would have little to pass on ourselves. Without fear and with thanksgiving and with hope for all that awaits, we remember those who have gone before. We honor the circle of life and death and our place within this sacred thread. May it be so. I invite you to rise now, either in body or in spirit, and join in singing our closing hymn, "Comfort Me." we extinguish the flame of our chalice, but not our commitment to our mission, to welcome radically, to love boldly, to grow spiritually, and to serve courageously. This we do because we envision a beloved community filled with compassion, helping all to thrive in a just world. I invite you now, if you're comfortable, to join hands with someone close to you. My friends, my hope for you this morning is that you go forth from our time together, remembering that our memories tie us to one another and to this sacred web of which we are grateful to be a part. Go in peace.